Well, thank you all for coming. I would like to welcome you to the fall 2025 Socrates Cafe. We do one of these each semester in the Religion and Philosophy Department, and Dr. Sawyer is going to be speaking about the Buddha and an atheist on what we owe each other and the planet. Dr. Sawyer is one of ULB's own. He graduated from the Religion and Philosophy Department how long ago?
20 years ago.
Oh, I didn't but we're proud to have him on our faculty with us. He went on to Claremont, did a PhD in philosophy, president of the International Art Society.
Yep.
And we welcome him and look forward to what you have to give us.
Okay, thank you. So I have to admit that I am excited to be here talking with you today, but I'm also nervous, partly because this is actually the first time that my colleagues like Jonathan and Dan have ever seen anything related to my research before, or I'm actually presenting it. So, that's a little bit nerve-wracking, but I'm also feeling a little bit nervous about it because the last time I did present my research to them, it was as a senior defending my senior project. So yeah, literally 20 years ago, that was the last time, was defending my senior project, and now here I am, like presenting this and doing this. So, but I want to thank you. I appreciate all of you being here, and appreciate Provost O'Donnell. Actually, you'll actually see, I went to your talk earlier today, and you're going to see there's a couple of things that might hint in relation to what we're doing. So I'm going to talk a bit about, the Buddha. I'm going to talk about a philosopher named Jean-Paul Sartre and try to give you just a little bit of some ideas that I've been thinking about. This comes from a piece where I contributed to a volume on Sartre's philosophy and ecology, and my contribution was doing it from a Buddhist perspective. So that's what I'm going to be doing here. So I want to begin with a basic philosophical starting point. So I know a lot of you are not philosophy majors and have a lot of background in philosophy, so I'm going to try to keep this commonsensical here. So forgive me for my people who are philosophy experts that I might kind of jarble up a few things for the sake of simplicity. But I want to talk about David Hume because he's a very famous skeptic who came up with this idea called this is-ought distinction with a bit of criticism. So what David Hume did was he made this observation that people often make this move to talk about some facts about the world to some value or moral judgment, right? So the way he says, the way we say something is determines the way the world ought to be. So as an example here, you think of just saying something like, helping others increases happiness, right? That's a fact. And then, of course, someone right after that will say, and therefore, we ought to help others. And actually, Hume says, no, that's actually a little too fast, right? That move is a little too quick and not justified. So he says, the move from the is to an ought isn't actually justified, because what you still actually need to show here is that we ought to actually promote happiness, okay? So, and that actually isn't shown here. There's kind of just this jump towards this. And so if I'm going to put this in maybe a modern context, you think of something that's like a provocative ethical issue that, within the last 10, 20 years that people argued about, for example, was like the ethics of homosexuality, right? And one of the topics basically that was a hot topic thing was, is homosexuality a choice or not, right? And what people were very concerned about was whether it's a choice. And the answer is why? Because if it is a choice, someone would say, then therefore you cannot do it, and therefore you should not do it because my belief system says you shouldn't do it, right? And therefore you're responsible for it. And then you have a group of other people say, no, it's not a choice. It's natural, right? It's instinctual. It's a part of someone's genetics and so forth. And therefore that tendency is blameless, and therefore we shouldn't be criticizing or harming people for those pieces. But then you have gay intellectuals like John Corvino come along and say, well, yeah, but Hume's kind of right here, right? This whole debate between whether it is or is not a choice is basically dependent on the idea that somehow the origin of someone's sexual desire is going to determine whether it's moral or not. And Hume says, actually, no, you actually need to figure out whether something is or is not moral, regardless of where the desire comes from and so forth. So that's a basic starting point because I want to bring in now my existentialist for the part here, Jean-Paul Sartre, who, for those of you who don't know him, he wrote all kinds of things. He was a philosopher, but he also was a playwright and a novelist and a screenwriter and a political activist and a biographer and a literary critic. He did pretty much everything, right? But he's a key figure in the philosophy of existentialism and what's known as phenomenology. And the reason why I'm bringing him up right after talking about Hume is that Sartre grew out of this Humean context, and therefore he found himself struggling trying to justify ethics. For there's basically this question of why should we be moral? And the question is, well, why? Well, here's a couple of reasons why. One is that Sartre was an atheist. So this first question is, without God, where do we get our morals from? Okay. Secondly, he claimed that nature and life are ultimately without meaning or value. So you think, like, why be ethical if life and nature are meaningless? And at the same time, but he also thought, Sartre, thought that we were responsible for all we do and what we don't do because we have agency and freedom. So on the one hand, I have this agency to do things and I'm free and I'm responsible, but a lot of what I do is without value and there's no God really grounding it. So there's this issue here that he's really concerned about. So I'm going to actually kind of leave him here for a moment. I'm going to jump over to the Buddha to try to bring in another voice here. And hopefully these things will come together and be clear as well. So let's talk a bit about the Buddha. Roughly about 480 to 400 BCE, the founder of Buddhism, born into the family of King Shuddhodana and Queen Maya about the year 480 in a region in the Indian subcontinent that now lies in what we would call southern Nepal. The given name was Siddhartha Gautama, which means something like goal achieved. But what I want to talk about is the Buddha becoming the Buddha, which means like awakened one. And he grounded his philosophy in what he called these Four Noble Truths. And the first one just basically says something like that life inevitably involves suffering, right? So it doesn't matter whether you're rich, poor, white, black, Chicana, Asian, everybody suffers, right? Everybody suffers. And then the question is, why do we suffer? And the reason why we suffer is because we crave things and we are attached to things and we're ignorant, right? So that's the second noble truth, right? Suffering arises from this craving, attachment, and ignorance. And so then, but there's a solution to that. Right? Because if we know that suffering arises from this craving, attachment, and ignorance, then the solution to suffering is nirvana, which means something like blowing out, right? Or extinguishing the causes of suffering. But now the question is, okay, so that sounds great. I want to get rid of suffering. How do I do that? And so you do that through this eightfold path, which can take you there, where you basically have all of these skillful or right ways of engaging with your views and your thoughts and your speech and your actions and your livelihood, giving the right kind of effort, mindfulness. Some of you probably heard that, and concentration. So that was a little quick, but the point is that that's kind of a brief kind of run through of some of the basics. So now I want to try to bring Hume back, if I can. Because, and also this other topic about ecology. Because there's a problem now maybe for both Sartre and the Buddha, because on the one hand, it's acknowledged by Buddhist scholars that the modern Western ecological view of the planet sits very well within a Buddhist framework. In other words, Buddhists are very eco-friendly, right, as a group of people. But there's a question here, which is similar to what Sartre talks about. Here I'm using Simon P. James, a scholar of Buddhist philosophy, who says one can endorse an ecological view of nature. One can even insist on the unity or oneness of humans in nature, and yet at the same time consistently regard nature as devoid of value. One could fully appreciate the intimate ecological connections between all things in nature, humans included, and yet not care at all about habitat depletion, overhunting, and global climate change. All right, so the way I'm interpreting that is something like this, right? So maybe wouldn't Buddhism have a similar problem as Sartre in maybe establishing ethics, particularly one aiming to support ecology and environmentalism? Okay, well, here's my thesis and my argument, is that I'm going to claim that actually Buddhist philosophy and Sartre's existentialism challenge Hume's is-ought distinction by making it impossible actually to separate them in theory and in practice. And as a result of that, I'm going to say that morality is actually a product of how we see the earth, ourselves, and each other. And therefore, moral cultivation is the development of an appropriate engagement with the earth. And this fact, I argue, actually grounds both an existentialist and a Buddhist environmental ethics. I'm not sure if I can do all that. I'm gonna try though. I'm gonna try. So let's begin basic. Perception 101, Buddhism and Sartrean style. Let's keep it simple. All right. So the basic point is that Buddhism and Sartre actually share a pretty similar view on perception. So Sartre basically thinks that consciousness is always about something, right? If you're angry at someone, always about something. And Buddhism says something very similar, that when you get down to it, consciousness is awareness. It's always awareness of something. So that's a basic starting point. But what's important for my view and that I'm trying to point in here is to bring in this next point, which is that both of them basically make the claim that every time we perceive something, it carries some kind of feeling or emotional tone. So for example, like, I'm not just seeing a cup of coffee, but it's like, that smells good. And yes, and like, I kind of want it. And I'm kind of cold, and it'd be nice to have a nice warm beverage. Or maybe for some of you, you hate coffee. Ugh, that stuff, my dad used to, drink coffee and then breathe on me, and the smell is terrible, right? All that kind of stuff. So you might have a kind of, maybe kind of a movement towards it that you want it, or you might have this aversion towards it. But the point is that you're not just seeing a cup of coffee, you're seeing something with all of this emotional feeling tones connected to it as well. And so the idea is that the way we actually focus our attention, the concepts that we use to understand things, and what captures our notice are all actually moral matters. It's not that things come after perception, which is what some people will claim, but the way I want to say this is that things actually that shape, things that shape how we perceive the world in the first place. So let me kind of go back to it. It's like if you happen to be somebody who adheres to like a certain kind of Christian worldview, then you're likely going to think that the main problem that is in the world is sin, right? And once that's the problem, then you're going to see it in yourself, sin. And you're going to see it in other people too. You're going to see sin, If on the other hand, if you're a vegetarian, right? And then you go over to your friend's house and they sit down and they made this beautiful steak and it looks very nice and they put it out in front of you, you might have this aversion to it that someone else looking at it would be watering. The mouth is just, ooh, that is great. And so the point that the ethics and the facts just tend to come together, right? It actually changes the way that you're going to actually see the world based on the beliefs that you have. All right, so if we start to put these pieces together, you start to ask yourself, then what happens when you have a mistaken perception of the world and the earth? And what Buddhists will claim is, actually, we do that quite a bit. We do that because we often have greed, hatred, and delusion. And if we have this greed, hatred, and delusion, then that's going to contribute to ours and other people's suffering, which brings us back to the first noble truth. And so sometimes the way that if students have been with me in class, I'll kind of make this point, but it's like, we live in Southern California, and we've been on the freeways before, and, like if you're anything like me, someone cuts you off on the way here, and that's a little frustrating, or someone's not paying any attention, and they almost run into you because they're on their phone, and these things are all really annoying and frustrating. And yet, what did I expect this morning when I woke up? That suddenly everyone was going to be very peaceful and sweet and kind and compassionate in all of the ways that I expect them to be, right? It's like by having the wrong kind of expectation this morning. In other words, a belief that doesn't actually match up with the way the world really is, right? I'm going to be disappointed. I'm going to suffer because my belief doesn't match with the way things actually are. And that's going to not only just contribute to my own suffering, but others too, because then when that person cuts me off, and they're in a bad mood, and then I yell at them, and then we're all yelling at each other, right? And we can't hear each other, and it all looks ridiculous, right? As we're kind of going like this in our cars, So you have no idea what I'm talking about, right? No idea? No? Okay, all right. So to kind of bring this back, the idea is that Buddhism grounds its worldview on this first noble truth, which is suffering, right? Again, life inevitably involves suffering. There's nothing wrong with us because we suffer. It's a natural part of life. So suffering, which is called dukkha, or discontent, is prevalent in the world. And so to come back to my main starting point, just that starting point itself, in my view, blurs this perception between facts and ethics, right? Where suffering is a fact, but also suffering is a moral problem, too. It's not just one or the other. And so my conclusion is that, not my conclusion for the entirety of everything here, but kind of this initial point is just to say that suffering is a fact. It's a fact of the animal-human condition, but it's also a moral problem. It's a moral problem to be dealt with and skillfully managed. And so to piece some of these pieces together, right, to bring Sartre back in the picture again as well, is that Sartre and the Buddhists basically agree, and I'm numbering these, that one, greed, right, this tendency to cling towards something, that we want something, but also hatred or this aversion, are commonplace in the way we engage the planet, its inhabitants, and ourselves. And because of that, that's going to contribute to our suffering. So that's the feeling tone. That's the emotional tone to it. But there's this third unwholesome mode that I mentioned before that aggravates and increases our suffering, and that's delusion. So just to pop back to that original one, right? Yeah, you have greed, hatred, and delusion. And so now we're coming back to it. So we hit on greed and hatred, but then there's that point of delusion. And again, delusion is about having the wrong beliefs, you know? And so what Buddhism often will say is suffering is inevitable, right? We're going to be, the analogy is that we get hit with these arrows. We get hit with arrows of suffering, and we kind of, as much as we try to dodge them, right? You're doing this kind of game, you're going to get hit with them. You're going to suffer some. But then what we do is we like make it worse. We like kind of stab it and like, why is this happening? And you know, right? We personalize it as if like my suffering is only unique to me. It's not that everyone suffers. And so we dig it in worse, and we make we scratch the scab, and we do all that stuff. Or sometimes we add in other arrows that are related to it. So we just keep hitting ourselves with these arrows, you know, is part of the problem. And so this final concept, in my view, this delusion, links the Sartrean and Buddhist perspective more concretely. And in my view, it actually grounds ethics then as a reordering of our perception of the earth. So the basic formula, if I've lost you at all or whatever, hopefully, hopefully like Provost O'Donnell's, the thread is there. I hope it is. I'm bringing a bunch of random stuff, but hopefully a thread is here. But basically what I want to say is if you misknow reality, if you impose on reality things that are just not the way the world really is, then you're going to cause more suffering and discontent, right? For yourself, but also for other people. And so now if I can kind of link that to a bit of trying to engage with the solution to this. And it's not like I can give you every single solution in 20 minutes. So hopefully you can at least give me that grace here a bit. But if we do want to diminish suffering, it's not simply a matter of just being a more ethical person, right? We actually have to start to cultivate our knowledge of the world and what we know, right? Because I'm sure, as you probably notice, if for those of you who even remotely do anything on social media, I don't think anyone does that here, right? No one's on social media? No one? Right? But the amount of misinformation out there, right? And how that's directly connected to how much everybody hates each other, right? Because what we hate is not a person. We hate like a caricature or like a character. We hate characters. We don't necessarily hate people. We hate characters. Because if that same person that's saying something is like your mom or your brother, maybe you hate that person, but maybe you kind of give them a little grace. Okay, I understand, but they have this. So there's a sense in which sometimes we're hating characters instead of actually people. So if we want to diminish the suffering, we must learn the ways that we contribute to the suffering of others and ourselves. And that's through both simply our ethical behavior, like are we just doing things that are hurtful because of the ethical choices that we're making? But also we have to recognize that mistaken beliefs we have are also going to hurt ourselves and other people. And these beliefs, by extension, are going to impact positively or negatively our ecological and environmental conditions and resources. Maybe some of you are wondering, where's the ecology going to come in here? And this is kind of where I want to link it up here. Because if values are fundamentally grounded in the facts of the world, then we have to start to think a bit about naturalism and the natural world as our place in it in the way that we actually are. As Jay Garfield, who's a Buddhist scholar in the West, says, that they are perceptual sets, ways of experiencing and taking up with the world that allow us not only to see the world more accurately, but more ethically as well. So the way that I want to put this is that we often think of ourselves as individuals, and we pride individualism in countries like America. But there's a bit of an illusion to that. We really actually aren't individuals in the way that we tend to think we are, as like these like atomistic billiard balls on table bouncing off of each other, and we're totally isolated and separate from each other. The way I think of this is that actually, and I often don't think we take this seriously enough, is that every single thing that we do is impacting ourselves and other people. Whether we know that impact, it is. Something as simple as, and I talk to my students about this, you think of the difference between walking across campus with looking down at your phone and checking up on something on social media, or walking around campus with your headphones on and having your phone to it, which is kind of signaling to the world, right? Like, I'm kind of doing my own thing, leave me alone, right? Versus not doing that and walking and talking to people, right? That doesn't sound like much, but it actually does. If we're trying to engage and create community, the point is I am on a campus with hundreds of other students simultaneously, all the time, all the day. And we have these opportunities to be able to interact and engage with each other, and often we don't. And when we look around, right, we're struggling with isolation. We're struggling with anxiety. We're struggling with depression. And those things often, from why I want to say this, are connected to our mistaken beliefs about ourselves and the way the world is. We do want community. We do want to connect with people. But we don't often see that we actually are connected, and we have to take that more seriously. So to conclude here with this point, what do I think multiple moral cultivation is? If I was going to summarize it, I'd say it really does amount to an appropriate engagement with reality. And then if I'm going to try to unpack that a little bit more, an appropriate engagement with reality means to take very seriously our deeply interconnected, impermanent, and unsatisfactory existence and conditions. Now, that might sound a little pessimistic with unsatisfactory, but what I'm really just getting at there is to recognize that all of us actually really are connected, and the things that we do impact ourselves and other people. We often forget that. And when I mean unsatisfactory, I mean the fact that we have to recognize that we actually all do suffer, right? And when I recognize that I suffer and it feels bad, and I see suffering in somebody else, then that's where the facts and values come together. I want to alleviate that suffering. I want to connect to this person and somebody else. And so, as I sometimes will tell my students, that you think of like, many of us probably woke up this morning and we're like, wow, the traffic is bad. The traffic is bad this morning. But we forget I am traffic, right? Like the traffic is bad. It's out there. But like, I'm also in my car driving here. Like, I am traffic too. So in the same way that other people set us back, we are setting other people back too. And we're not often seeing that. We're not often seeing that. And so to kind of bring this back is like we think we're acting all alone, but we're actually not acting alone. When we act, we're acting for other people too. By the things that we do, by the resources we use, by the choices we make, and the impact that they have, large and small. One cannot act alone or just merely as a human being, right? But that all of life, organic and inorganic, depends on each other to exist. So in my mind, even though you're thinking like, has he really been talking about ecology? From the whole time I've been thinking about this ecology. I just talked about cars, right? And we think, and again, the traffic is bad, but we also recognize sometimes, hey, I'm just driving, but we are all impacting the environment in all kinds of ways that we're not recognizing it. And here's the point. We depend upon that for our existence, and everything in the world depends on the existence of all of us together. So I love Thich Nhat Hanh, who's a Vietnamese Buddhist monk who just passed away not too long ago. But I'm going to kind of read this quote as a final conclusion here. He says, look into the self, right? Look into yourself. And if you're going to not misknow reality, right, the kind of the way I'm getting at it, is if you look into the self, you're going to discover that it's made only of non-self elements. Now, let me just kind of pack that up just a tiny bit here. It's like, what do you have to you to even exist? Like, I think I'm an individual, but yet, like, right, I have oxygen I'm breathing in, right, which is dependent on the plants in my connection. I have water in my system, which is dependent on everything here, which we need the clouds and we need the sun, right? We need the air. I have the minerals and vitamins in my body, right, which are all a product of the plants and everything and all those nutrients that allow me to be healthy and strong. So look into the self and discover it's made up only of non-self elements. A human being is made up of only non-human elements. And so to protect humans, we have to protect the non-human elements, the air, the water, the forest, the river, the mountains, and the animals. And we have to remove the notion of humans as something that can survive by itself alone. Humans can survive only with the survival of other species. So-called inanimate things are alive also. Our notions about living beings and animate things should be removed for us to touch reality. So my invitation to you is to start to kind of think a bit about, even if you didn't agree with some of the things that I threw out there, you're not Buddhist, that's fine. But what I would sort of invite you to just start to think about is the ways in which the beliefs that you have and the ethical choices you make, that they do impact you and they impact other people, and start to take that just a little bit more seriously, right? The opportunity cost that we have in anything that we do. And so I'd like to end with a thank you, because you came here today. And I deeply appreciate your being here and your community and your presence and your engagement here. So I just want to say thank you for being here and making that choice.